What if the most profound act of worship in human history began with God allowing Satan to utterly devastate a righteous man? This is the terrifying truth woven into the fabric of one of the oldest stories ever told. It's a narrative not about human failure, but about the enduring strength of faith. It speaks not of divine punishment, but of divine permission. In the majestic throne room of heaven, God himself singled out a man named Job, granting hell leave to unleash its fury upon him. This was not because Job was weak or undeserving, but precisely because he was profoundly faithful. What followed transcended mere earthly suffering, blossoming into a cosmic drama so intense that even the celestial hosts fell silent, and the very foundations of faith seemed to tremble. This is the chronicle of the greatest test of faith the world has ever witnessed. Job's name has become almost universally synonymous with suffering, yet such a simplistic association entirely misses the profound essence of his story. His narrative isn't merely an exploration of why bad things happen to good people. Rather, it's a gripping account of what unfolds when the invisible, eternal war between heaven and hell selects a human heart as its primary battlefield. It is the epic journey of a man who lost everything conceivable, only to discover something far more precious, something worth more than all he had combined. In the ancient land of Uzi, a man of unparalleled righteousness resided, his very name a tremor in the foundations of hell, his every prayer a whispered petition carefully observed by heaven itself. Job's life was a testament not merely to outward prosperity, but to profound inner character. He wasn't just wealthy, he was genuinely generous. He wasn't simply successful, he was deeply spiritual. In a world where most people offered God their meager leftovers, Job devoutly served him with his first and his very best. But the cynical eye of the accuser, Satan, had also been observing, formulating a theory about humanity's core nature, one that threatened to unravel the very fabric of cosmic order. His chilling hypothesis: nobody truly loves God for who he is. They only love him for what he gives them. Remove the blessings, strip away their comfort, tear down the hedge of divine protection, and watch even the most steadfast crumble into bitter curses. God's response, stark and absolute, fundamentally altered the stakes, ushering in a pivotal moment. Very well then. Everything he has is in your power. What happens when heaven, the source of all comfort, suddenly falls silent, and the only voice echoing through the void is that of the relentless accuser? On one ordinary morning, Job awoke as one of the wealthiest, most blessed men on earth, surrounded by abundance and joy. By sunset, in a single, cataclysmic day, he would tragically become the most famous sufferer in human history. Between the gentle rise of the sun and the encroaching darkness, his beloved children would perish, his vast wealth would vanish into thin air, and his once healthy body would transform into a ravaged battlefield of unrelenting pain. And just when Job might have believed his trial had reached its agonizing peak, God would orchestrate something utterly unexpected, something no one could have foreseen. You are about to witness the most profound drama ever written, a divine narrative where suffering becomes a grand stage, where pain is miraculously transformed into a crucible of purpose, and where one man's unwavering refusal to curse God blossoms into an eternal testimony that echoes through the corridors of time. The question isn't whether you've merely heard of Job. The question is, are you truly prepared to witness what worship looks like when it demands the ultimate cost, when it strips you of absolutely everything? Sometimes, the seemingly impenetrable silence of heaven is not an absence of God, but rather a meticulously prepared stage set for a profound revelation. Before the storm, there was the man. Job wasn't just wealthy, he was exceptionally generous. He wasn't simply successful, he was profoundly spiritual. In a world where most people served God with their meager leftovers, Job distinguished himself by serving him with his very first and his absolute best. Each dawn, even before the sun cast its first golden hues across the hills of Uzi, Job would rise to offer solemn sacrifices for his children. This wasn't because they had overtly sinned, but out of a deep, paternal love and a humble awareness that they might have sinned in their hearts. "Perhaps my children have cursed God in their hearts," he would whisper, his breath mingling with the rising smoke from the altar. This wasn't an act of paranoia. It was the sacred burden of a father who deeply understood that abundant blessing comes hand in hand with immense responsibility, and that great privilege often carries with it significant spiritual dangers. He was blessed with 7 sons and 3 daughters. His material wealth was staggering: 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yokes of oxen, 500 donkeys, and servants beyond counting. Yet, none of these earthly possessions or familial blessings impressed heaven as much as this singular truth: Job feared God and consistently turned away from evil. The word fear here doesn't denote terror or dread. It signifies a reverence so deep, so all-encompassing, that it meticulously shaped every single one of his decisions. Job didn't merely believe in God. He lived his entire life as though God was constantly watching, because he knew, with unwavering certainty, that God was watching. In the ancient world, immense wealth was frequently perceived as irrefutable proof of divine favor. Job possessed both, yet he bore his blessings not as a proud owner, but as a humble steward, understanding they were entrusted to him. When the poor sought refuge at his gate, they never departed empty-handed. When the orphan cried out for justice, Job's voice thundered with righteous indignation in the courts. When the widow desperately needed protection, Job became her unyielding shield. He was described as blameless, not sinless, but complete in his integrity, upright, not perfect, but remarkably consistent. He was precisely the kind of man whose very existence stirred a deep unease within Satan. You see, Job represented something inherently dangerous to the encroaching kingdom of darkness. His life unequivocally proved that it was entirely possible to be greatly blessed and still retain profound humility, to be exceedingly rich and yet remain perfectly righteous, to be undeniably powerful and still maintain an unblemished purity. In a world where most people either served God conditionally, for what they could gain, or readily abandoned him when life became arduous, Job loved God simply and profoundly because God was inherently worthy of being loved. He was a vibrant echo of Eden in a world still fallen, a poignant preview of the coming kingdom in an age thoroughly broken. He was the kind of man who made angels ponder what Adam might have been and caused demons to tremble at what humanity could truly become. But Satan had also been watching, and he, too, had formulated a theory. In the unseen spiritual realm, Job had transcended being merely a man. He had, in essence, become a cosmic test case. The ultimate question was no longer simply about Job's individual faith. It was about the very nature of faith itself. Can anyone truly love God for who he intrinsically is? Or do we all, deep down, only love him for the gifts he bestows upon us? The accuser was about to force an answer. Then, the sons of God, a host of divine beings, came to present themselves before the Lord. It was a vast, glorious assembly convened in the majestic throne room of heaven. Angels, radiant beings of light, arrived from the 4 corners of creation, each carrying meticulous reports of their stewardship. They bowed in awe before the Ancient of Days, the air thick with profound worship and heavy with an overwhelming holiness. And then, a jarring shadow, a presence that fundamentally did not belong, intruded upon the scene. Satan arrived among them, not furtively sneaking or hiding, but walking boldly, defiantly, into the very presence of the Almighty, as though he possessed every right to be there. And in this cosmic courtroom, he did. He is the accuser of the brethren, the relentless prosecutor in the eternal trial of human hearts. Where have you come from? God asked. The question was not posed to gain information. It was a divine summons for declaration, a demand for Satan to articulate his movements. Satan's answer succinctly revealed his restless, malevolent nature. From roaming throughout the earth, going back and forth on it. He is the ceaseless wanderer, the the predatory prowler, constantly searching for souls he may devour. But then, God did something utterly unexpected, something that changed everything. He brought up Job's name. Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. Why would God do this? Why would the Almighty, the all-knowing Creator, deliberately place his most faithful servant directly into Satan's crosshairs? Satan's immediate response cut to the very heart of every believer's deepest, unspoken fear. Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands, so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. This was the audacious accusation that reverberated and shook the cosmos. No one really loves God. They only love his gifts. Take away the blessings, and you'll instantly see the truth. Strip away their comfort, and watch their worship swiftly disappear. Remove the protective hedge, and witness their faith crumble into bitter cursing. Satan's challenge wasn't merely aimed at Job's circumstances. It was a direct assault on the fundamental authenticity of all human worship. And then came the moment that, without exaggeration, defines the entire book, God's permission. Very well then, everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself, do not lay a finger. What if your greatest, most agonizing pain is, in fact, God's highest, most profound vote of confidence in you? The accuser departed from the heavenly court, armed with a terrifying license to destroy, but with one crucial, non-negotiable limit: not to kill. The test was meticulously set. The stage was tragically prepared. And Job, the faithful, generous, worshiping Job, remained utterly unaware that his name had just been spoken, sealed, in the highest courts of heaven. The war for his very soul was about to commence. The morning began, as countless mornings before, in its familiar, blessed rhythm. Job's children were feasting merrily at their oldest brother's house. The diligent servants were tending to the vast flocks. The strong oxen were steadily plowing the fields. Life flowed smoothly, predictably. And then, the first messenger burst onto the scene, running, breathless, wild-eyed with panic, covered in the dust of terror. The Sabaeans attacked and carried off the oxen and donkeys, he gasped, struggling for air. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. Before Job could even process the words, before the initial shock could fully settle in, another figure appeared on the distant horizon, running, stumbling, desperate to deliver news that would shatter yet another piece of his world. The fire of God fell from the heavens and burned up the sheep and the servants, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. The fire of God. Even amidst the utter destruction and overwhelming loss, the messenger instinctively recognized a divine, formidable power at play. This wasn't random chance. This wasn't a mere accident. This was something else entirely, something far more sinister and deliberate. Job's mind raced, his heart pounded with a terrifying drumbeat, but the nightmare, he realized, was only just beginning. A third messenger arrived, his clothes torn, his face streaked with tears of unadulterated horror. The Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on your camels and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. 3 messengers, 3 devastating disasters, 3 vital pieces of a carefully constructed, blessed life now lay in smoking ruins. But Satan was not yet finished. He had meticulously saved the absolute worst for last. The 4th messenger didn't run. He stumbled, utterly broken. He could barely articulate his words through wrenching sobs. When he finally found his voice, the words came out fractured, utterly shattered. Your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed on them, and they are dead, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. The silence that followed was utterly deafening, a vacuum of sound that pressed in on Job. In one single, terrible, Cosmic day. Job had lost his immense wealth, his entire livelihood, and, most agonizingly, all of his beloved children. Everything that had made life worth living had been stripped away in a relentless barrage of 4 conversations, delivered by 4 messengers, each a hammer blow directly to his soul. The sky hadn't merely broken open, it had, quite literally, fallen upon him. Job stood there, amidst the smoldering wreckage of his entire world. And then, he did something that made heaven weep in sorrow, and hell tremble in baffled fury. He tore his robe. He shaved his head, a profound act of mourning. And then, he fell to the ground in worship, not defiance. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. Worship is never more authentic, never more real, than when it courageously rises from the depths of utter ruin. But Satan was far from finished. Not yet. The accuser returned to heaven, his ethereal form radiating fury and intense frustration. Job had passed the initial test, defying all expectations. He had lost absolutely everything, yet he had still worshipped. He had been brutally stripped of his wealth, his livelihood, and even his cherished children, yet his lips had spoken words of praise instead of bitter curses. Satan's meticulously crafted theory was visibly cracking, but he was not yet ready to concede defeat or surrender. Skin for skin, he snarled with venomous conviction before the throne. A man will give all he has for his own life. But now stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face. The logic was chillingly cold and calculating. People, he reasoned, can endure the loss of possessions. They can even, somehow, survive the devastating death of loved ones. But when physical pain invades their own body, when suffering becomes profoundly personal and utterly inescapable, that's asterisk when faith finally shatters. God's response remained unwavering, a second permission, but again, with clear limits. Very well then, he is in your hands, but you must spare his life. What followed was a masterpiece of misery, an agonizing descent into physical torment. Job's body, once vibrant and strong, became a living battlefield. Painful, festering sores erupted from the very soles of his feet to the crown of his head. His skin cracked and oozed with pus. His flesh began to rot while he was still agonizingly alive. The man who had once been the most blessed and revered in all the East was now utterly unrecognizable, a horrifying, walking picture of extreme human frailty. He took a jagged piece of broken pottery and desperately scraped himself as he sat among the ashes. The ash heap, that desolate, refuse-laden place where waste was burned and the unwanted was discarded, became his new dwelling. Job, who had once sat at the city gates, dispensing profound wisdom and justice, now sat on a garbage dump, scraping pus from his agonizing wounds. And then his wife appeared. We often, in our haste, paint her as the villain, but one must pause to imagine her equally profound pain. She, too, had lost all her children. She had watched her husband, the man she loved, the father of her now dead children, transform from a pillar of strength into a broken, diseased figure covered in repulsive sores. Her world had collapsed just as completely and violently as his own. "Are you still maintaining your integrity?" she asked, her voice laced with raw despair. The words, when truly understood, weren't cruel, they were desperate. Curse God and die. End this charade. Stop this pretense. If this is what faithfulness truly gets you, then abandon your faith. Choose the peace of death over this living hell. Job's response cut through the ashes like a sharpened sword, unwavering and resolute. You are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God and not trouble? Even amidst such excruciating pain, indeed, especially in his pain, Job adamantly refused to let suffering rewrite his fundamental theology. He would not allow his devastating circumstances to dictate his understanding of God's unchanging character. The very same hands that had once blessed him so abundantly were now permitting this profound affliction, and Job, incredibly, would trust both. In all this, Job did not sin in what he said. But the real, agonizing test was only just beginning. Because sometimes, the cruelest trial is not what God allows to happen, but rather what well-meaning friends say in response to it. News, especially bad news, traveled astonishingly fast in the ancient world. When Job's three closest friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, heard about the unimaginable troubles that had befallen him, they set out from their homes. They met together by agreement, their sole intention to go and sympathize with him, to offer comfort. These were not mere casual acquaintances. They were old, trusted friends, wise men in their own right, respected leaders who had known Job intimately in his days of prosperity. They had shared meals at his lavish table, laughed at his jokes, and sought his invaluable counsel in difficult times. They truly loved him, which, tragically, makes what happens next infinitely more heartbreaking. When they first saw him from a distance, they could barely recognize him. The emaciated man sitting amongst the ashes bore no resemblance whatsoever to the vibrant, powerful Job they remembered. His face was swollen almost beyond recognition. His body was covered in a horrifying mosaic of running sores. His voice, when he attempted to speak, was barely an agonizing whisper. The strongest, most resolute man they had ever known now looked as if he were already a corpse. They began to weep aloud, their cries echoing in the desolate landscape. They tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads toward heaven, ancient, profound signs of mourning and utter shock. And then, they did something truly beautiful, something we rarely acknowledge in our hurried rush to criticize them. They sat down with him on the ground for 7 days and 7 nights. No one dared to utter a single word to him, because they bore witness to the overwhelming, indescribable magnitude of his suffering. 7 days of profound silence, 7 nights of unwavering presence, 168 hours of simply being there, sharing his grief without attempting to fix it, to explain it away, or to spiritualize it into tidy theological answers. For 7 full days, they got it absolutely right. They understood, in that moment, that sometimes love doesn't speak. It just sits. Picture that raw, desolate scene, for men sitting in the ashes under the vast, indifferent desert sky, the wind whistling mournfully through the garbage heap, the agonizing sound of Job's labored, shallow breathing, the immense weight of their shared sorrow pressing down like a physical, suffocating thing, the putrid smell of burning refuse mingling sickeningly with the stench of infected wounds. But in that profound silence, something subtle, yet deeply significant, was occurring. 3 men were observing their friend's utter destruction, desperately trying to make sense of it all. Their minds were working furiously, grinding, relentlessly searching for explanations. Their ingrained theology was churning, desperate to locate a formula, a logical framework, that could contain this unfathomable mystery. Why would God allow this? There had to be a reason. There had to be a clear logic. There had to be something Job had done, some sin he committed, to deserve this catastrophe. Because if there wasn't, if this could happen to someone as undeniably righteous as Job, then what terrifying implications did that hold for the rest of them, for their own security and understanding of God? The fragile silence was about to shatter, and when it did, their initial comfort would cruelly metamorphose into condemnation. The profound silence shattered like fragile glass. After 7 long days of sitting in the ashes, after 168 agonizing hours of silently witnessing their friends suffer, Job's friends finally broke their silence and spoke. What poured from their mouths, however, was not comforting words. It was theology, a cold, systematic, utterly merciless theology that cut deeper than any sword Satan himself had wielded. Eliphaz spoke first, the eldest and most respected among them, his words sounding deceptively spiritual, even wise. Consider now, who, being innocent, has ever perished? Where were the upright ever destroyed? As I have observed, those who plow evil and those who sow trouble reap it. His logic was simple, yet brutally unforgiving. Good things happen to good people. Bad things happen to bad people. Since terrible things are undeniably happening to you, Job, you must, by extension, be a bad person. The complex math of human suffering was thus reduced to a cold, unforgiving formula. Bildad swiftly picked up the theme, his voice hardening with each word. Does God pervert justice? Does the Almighty pervert what is right? When your children sinned against him, he gave them over to the penalty of their sin. Your children are dead, Job, he implied, because they deserve to die. God does not make mistakes. If you are suffering, you have undoubtedly earned it. If your family was destroyed, they had it coming. Zophar delivered the final, crushing blow with the smug confidence of a man who had never truly experienced profound suffering himself. Oh, how I wish that God would speak, that he would open his lips against you and disclose to you the secrets of wisdom. Know this, God has even forgotten some of your sin. You're getting off easy, Job, he essentially declared. God isn't punishing you as much as you truly deserve. Your suffering isn't evidence of divine injustice. It's actually evidence of his profound mercy. 3 men, 3 distinct variations of the same poisonous theme. Asterisk, you deserve this. Asterisk, have you ever been deeply hurt by someone attempting to fix your pain with glib, easy answers? Have you ever had well-meaning people attempt to explain your suffering in ways that only made it immeasurably worse? Job's friends, in their misguided attempts, represent every person who has ever wielded theology as a weapon, who has twisted the word of God into a cruel sword designed to wound the already bleeding. They weren't, at their core, malicious. They were terrified. Because if Job could suffer like this, so completely, so utterly, and without any discernible cause, then their neat, compartmentalized theological boxes were utterly useless. If righteousness did not guarantee blessing, if unwavering faithfulness did not ensure divine protection, then what security, what certainty, did any of them truly possess? So, in their fear, they audaciously rewrote the story. They made Job the villain, all to preserve their comforting, albeit flawed, view of God as predictable, controllable, and purely transactional. But Job, even in his immense agony, steadfastly refused to accept their twisted narrative. Though he slay me, yet will I hope in him. I will surely defend my ways to his face. The real, profound conflict wasn't merely Job versus his friends. It was Job versus their theology. And sometimes, tragically, theology devoid of empathy metastasizes into cruelty, all invoked in God's holy name. Something deep within Job finally snapped. For chapters, he had stoically maintained his composure. He had worshipped amidst the ashes. He had steadfastly refused to curse God. He had bravely defended his integrity against his friends' relentless accusations. But the human heart can only bear so much crushing weight before it ultimately buckles under the unbearable load. The dam of his composure broke, and what poured out was a torrent of raw, unfiltered anguish. May the day of my birth perish, and the night that said, "A boy is conceived." That day, may it turn to darkness. May God above not care about it. May no light shine on it. Job didn't curse God directly, but he cursed the very day God allowed him to be born. He didn't outright reject his creator, but he fiercely questioned why creation had to include him at all. The man who had, for so long, blessed the name of the Lord was now wishing he had never even existed to utter that sacred name. Why did I not perish at birth and die as I came from the womb? Why were there knees to receive me and breasts that I might be nursed? For now I would be lying down in peace. I would be asleep and at rest. This is the agonizing sound of a soul in freefall. It is the voice of a man who has discovered that there are unfathomable depths of pain for which no words exist, only groans too profound, too agonizing, for any language to capture. Job had found that terrifying place where unwavering faith and utter despair crash into each other like colossal tectonic plates, creating devastating earthquakes within the human heart. Why is light given to those in misery, and life to the bitter of soul, to those who long for death that does not come, who search for it more than for hidden treasure? The questions tumbled out of him like desperate accusations. each one a dagger thrust directly at the heart of existence itself. Why must the suffering remain conscious? Why can't the broken simply slip away into oblivion? Why does life stubbornly persist when life itself has become utterly unbearable? But crucially, notice what Job didn't do. He didn't curse God. He didn't abandon his faith. He didn't embrace his wife's desperate counsel to curse God and die. Instead, he did something that scandalized his rigid friends and profoundly revealed the true, intimate depth of his relationship with the Almighty. He complained to God about God. This was not atheism. It was, paradoxically, intimacy. Job's lament was not the voice of someone who had ceased believing. It was the raw, guttural cry of someone who believed so deeply, so passionately, that he felt utterly compelled to bring his darkest, most harrowing thoughts directly into the illuminating light of God's very presence. Scripture itself provides ample space for such holy anguish. The Bible includes Job's emotional collapse not as a cautionary warning against questioning, but as a profound comfort, undeniable proof that you can fiercely wrestle with God, engaging Him in your deepest pain, and still remain firmly within His embrace, still be wrestling with God. The darkness was about to deepen even further, but, unseen, the faint light of dawn was indeed coming. Just when it seemed the agonizing conversation had reached its bitter, hopeless end, a new, unexpected voice cut through the suffocating tension. Elihu, son of Barachel the Buzite, a younger man, had been silently listening, observing everything. Younger than the other men gathered, Elihu had initially kept his silence, a respectful deference to his elders. However, as the agonizing debate spiraled further into bitter accusations and profound despair, a righteous anger began to burn within him. It wasn't directed solely at Job's friends, but also, significantly, at Job himself. I am young in years and you are old. That is why I was timid and afraid to tell you what I know. I thought age should speak, advanced years should teach wisdom. But it is the Spirit in a person, the breath of the Almighty, that gives them understanding. Elihu's perspective truly heralded a different generation, a fresh outlook unclouded by the rigid, conventional formulas that had so ensnared and limited the older men. He perceived crucial truths that they had all utterly missed. Both Job and his friends, he asserted, were fundamentally mistaken, albeit for distinct reasons. To the friends, he pointedly remarked, "You have not answered Job's arguments. You've simply accused him without proof, condemned him without evidence." Then, turning to Job, Elihu boldly declared, "You have justified yourself rather than God. You have made yourself more righteous than the Almighty." Yet, Elihu's most profound contribution wasn't merely his critique of their flawed arguments. It was, rather, his revolutionary theology. While Job's friends had diminished God to the role of a cosmic accountant, meticulously balancing good deeds against bad, and Job himself had begun to perceive God as either absent or cruelly indifferent, Elihu offered a dramatically different portrayal. He painted a vibrant picture of a God who speaks in myriad ways, communicating even through the very experience of suffering itself. God speaks in one way and in two. Though people do not perceive it, in a dream, in a vision of the night, when deep sleep falls on mortals while they slumber on their beds, then he opens their ears and terrifies them with warnings. Sometimes, Elihu proposed with startling insight. Pain isn't punishment, it's communication. Suffering isn't always about what you've done wrong. Sometimes it's about what God wants to do right in your heart. God delivers the afflicted by their affliction and opens their ear by adversity. This was truly revolutionary thinking, challenging centuries of conventional wisdom. What if trials, instead of being stark evidence of God's absence, were in fact undeniable proof of His intimate involvement? What if the very experience that felt like utter abandonment was, astonishingly, a tension of the most intense and profound kind? Elihu spoke with palpable passion, with unwavering conviction, and with the fiery intensity of someone who genuinely believed he had glimpsed a profound truth that had eluded all the others. His words resonated in the air like an impending thunderclap, unequivocally demanding a response. And just as Job braced himself, preparing to offer his rebuttal, another voice dramatically broke through, a voice not from the earth, but from the heart of a swirling whirlwind. The protracted debate was poised to conclude, not because any human had definitively won the argument, but precisely because the very one they had been arguing about was finally about to speak for himself. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind. There was no preliminary warning, no gentle introduction, no soft transition from the cacophony of human debate to a divine declaration. The omnipotent voice that had, ages ago, spoken the entire universe into existence now suddenly erupted from the storm, and every other human voice instantly fell silent, rendered insignificant. But God did not come offering explanations for Job's suffering. Instead, he came with a series of profound questions. Who is this who darkens my counsel with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. The roles were utterly reversed in a single, breathtaking instant. For 37 arduous chapters, Job and his friends had relentlessly questioned God's justice, his unfathomable wisdom, and his very character. Now, it was God who was questioning them, not their suffering, but their fundamental understanding. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? The questions cascaded forth like peals of thunder, each one more overwhelmingly profound and humbling than the last. God did not deign to defend his actions or provide direct explanations for Job's plight. Instead, he chose to majestically reveal his boundless power and inherent glory. He didn't explain the suffering. Rather, he exposed the utter smallness and limited scope of human perspective in the face of divine creation. Have you ever given orders to the morning or shown the dawn its place? Have you journeyed to the springs of the sea or walked in the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been shown to you? This divine interrogation was not an act of cruelty. It was an invitation to a vastly broader perspective. God wasn't belittling Job's immense pain. Rather, he was meticulously expanding Job's vision beyond his immediate anguish. The very same God who commanded the morning into being and knew the precise dwelling place of light was, astonishingly, the God who had been intimately present in every single moment of Job's profound agony. Do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Do you watch when the doe bears her fawn? Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades? Can you loose the cords of Orion? The sheer poetry of these cosmic questions was breathtaking, but their underlying point was utterly devastating. If you cannot possibly comprehend how I govern the physical universe, God implied, how then can you presume to judge how I govern the moral one? Would you discredit my justice? Would you condemn me to justify yourself? There it was, laid bare, the absolute heart of the matter. In the depths of his immense suffering, Job had unwittingly begun to put God on trial, to presumptuously demand explanations, as though the almighty Creator somehow owed a mere creature an exhaustive account of his divine ways. God's response, surprisingly, was not one of anger, but of overwhelming awe. He didn't grant Job what he thought he wanted, simple answers to his complex questions, but rather what he actually needed, a direct, transformative encounter. The whirlwind was far more than a mere meteorological phenomenon. It was a profound act of divine revelation. The storm wasn't just a display of natural forces. It was a living, breathing theology. And in that transcendent moment, Job discovered a truth so potent it would fundamentally alter his entire world. Sometimes, God chooses not to provide logical explanations. Instead, he offers revelation. Sometimes, the ultimate answer to the question of why is God himself, powerfully revealed in his boundless might, majestic glory, and unfathomable mystery. Job was poised to learn that truly seeing God changes absolutely everything. In the terrifying, glorious presence of the whirlwind, Job's carefully prepared words died unspoken in his throat. For chapters, he had vehemently demanded an audience with God, eagerly anticipating the chance to present his detailed case, to argue his innocence, and to finally receive definitive answers for his inexplicable suffering. He had, in his human presumption, even imagined himself standing before the Almighty as an equal, fearlessly demanding justice and requiring explanations. But when God actually manifested himself, Job discovered a truth so profound it shattered every single assumption he had meticulously built. You don't argue with God, you encounter him. You don't debate the Almighty, you bow before him in reverent awe. I am unworthy. How can I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth. I spoke once, but I have no answer. Twice, but I will say no more. The profound silence that followed Job's confession was not a sign of defeat or resignation. It was, instead, a moment of profound revelation. Job had spent his entire agonizing ordeal desperately trying to intellectualize and make sense of his suffering. Now, in God's overwhelming presence, he realized that suffering had never been about intellectual sense. It had been about spiritual sight. Then God spoke again from the whirlwind, and his second speech proved even more overwhelmingly majestic than the first. He vividly painted awe-inspiring pictures of his boundless power, leaving Job utterly breathless. There was Behemoth, a creature of unimaginable, raw strength, and Leviathan, a terrifying monster no human could ever hope to tame. God showcased creation in all its wild, untamable glory, a testament to his own limitless might. The implicit message was undeniably clear. If you, Job, cannot even master the creatures I have made, how then can you presume to master or question the Creator who made them and everything else? And then, Job uttered the words that fundamentally changed everything. I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted. You asked, who is this that obscures my plans without knowledge? Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. However, it was his next profound declaration that truly unveiled the depth of his transformation. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. This, precisely, was the pivotal moment. Not the eventual restoration of his material wealth, nor the miraculous healing of his diseased body, nor even the joyous return of his beloved family. This was the singular instant when everything irrevocably changed for Job. It was the profound transition from a second-hand faith, one based on hearsay and intellectual assent, to a direct, first-hand encounter with the divine. He had previously heard about God from countless sources, respected teachers, revered traditions, the testimonies of others. But now, at last, he had seen God for himself. The significance of this difference was not merely academic, it was utterly life-altering. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. Job was not repenting of specific sins in this moment. Rather, he was repenting of his own profound smallness, his limited perspective and presumptuous judgment in the face of the infinite. He wasn't confessing guilt for wrongdoing. He was humbly acknowledging the immeasurable, unbridgeable chasm between the Almighty Creator and his finite creation. The physical and emotional pain of his ordeal didn't end first. The transformative encounter with God did. Job never received a precise, logical explanation for his suffering. Instead, he received something infinitely better, something ultimately more satisfying. He received God himself. And for a man who had tragically lost everything, finding God was enough. Indeed, it was more than enough. After Job's humble confession, the Lord addressed his three friends, delivering a stern rebuke. I am angry with you because you have not spoken the truth about me as my servant Job has. The irony was absolutely stunning. These friends, who had spent months vigorously defending what they perceived as God's justice, were now unequivocally condemned for their flawed theology and their misrepresentation of God. Conversely, the man who had dared to question God's ways with raw, unvarnished honesty was now commended for his integrity. Truth, it turned out, wasn't merely about possessing the right answers in a theological debate. It was fundamentally about cultivating and maintaining a right relationship with God himself. Then, in an act of profound grace, Job was called to intercede, to pray on behalf of, the very men who had so grievously wounded him with their harsh and misguided words. And astonishingly, he did. The man who had lost absolutely everything, whose spirit had been so utterly broken, became a priest and advocate for those who had only added to his immense pain. It was a remarkable demonstration of grace flowing freely from the brokenhearted toward those who had sought to break him even further. Following this profound intercession, the Lord finally restored Job's fortunes. But it's crucial to observe the precise order of these divine actions. First came the transformative encounter with God, then Job's compassionate intercession for his friends, and only then came the material restoration. God did not mend Job's external circumstances until he had first profoundly transformed Job's inner heart. The Lord abundantly blessed the latter part of Job's life even more than the former. He received 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 donkeys, double everything he had lost, with one poignant exception, his children. He was blessed with 7 new sons and 3 new daughters, but not 14 and 6, because children are not simply replaceable. They are, by their very nature, irreplaceable. Yet, something far deeper than mere prosperity had changed within Job. The man who ultimately emerged from the ashes of his ordeal was fundamentally not the same man who had entered them. He had truly seen God, not merely heard about him, believed in him, or served him, but had experienced a direct, personal vision of the divine. And that breathtaking sight had transformed absolutely everything. His daughters, notably, were given an inheritance alongside their brothers, an act revolutionary and groundbreaking for that ancient culture. The man who had personally encountered the God of justice now became a powerful agent of justice himself. His suffering had produced not corrosive bitterness, but profound beauty. Job lived for 140 years after the conclusion of his monumental trial, enjoying a long life where he saw his children and their children, even to the 4th generation. But more valuable than mere longevity, he had gained an eternal perspective. He had learned the profound secret that every believer, at some point, must truly discover. God is not merely our means to an end. He is the ultimate end itself. The story of Job doesn't conclude with just a satisfying restoration of his worldly possessions. It culminates in an act of deep reverence and awe. Job's greatest, most invaluable gain wasn't merely receiving his stuff back. It was the incomparable blessing of seeing his Savior clearly, face to face. What if your current trial isn't actually a punishment, but rather a sacred permission? Permission to see God more clearly and intimately than you ever dared to imagine? Permission to offer genuine worship even when that worship costs you absolutely everything? Permission to finally discover that even when you lose it all, if you truly possess God, you fundamentally possess enough. If this reflection has shifted how you perceive worship in the midst of personal loss, please consider sharing it with someone who might be facing their own personal whirlwind. Feel free to comment below. And if God were to point to you and ask, "Have you considered my servant?" what would your response be? Ultimately, Job's greatest test of faith evolved into humanity's most enduring and powerful testimony of God's boundless grace.